Hello, I'm Mike Bell and I'm the secretary of this all-party group on issues affecting men and boys. And the aim of this group is to develop the links between parliamentarians and those who are active on men's issues in the UK. This is one of a series of interviews with APPG members. You can find out more about APPGs and our work by following the links below this video. And you can support our work by subscribing to this channel, following us on Twitter, inviting others to do the same, or even making a financial contribution to support our work via the website. Thank you very much, Margaret Eaton, Baroness Eaton, to this interview, this APPG on issues affecting men and boys. And thank you for joining us today. So what brought you to be in the House of Lords and also interested in men and boys issues?
Yes. Oh, well, I came into the House in 2010, at the time when David Cameron became Prime Minister. Prior to that, I'd had a busy and active life for a long time in local government, and I was its leader for a period from 2000 to 2006. And Bradford Metropolitan District is a very, very large authority. It's the fourth largest Met. So it has a lot of people and a lot of issues associated with life, both rural life, urban life, and certainly market town life. So lots of looking at people living in different situations. Prior to that, I was a teacher in a very large estate. Having seen life as a councillor, life as a teacher, and then coming into the House of Lords, where a lot of the work that we do and the legislation has a really major impact on people's lives, I really felt that men and boys don't feature very often in legislation, particularly focused on them.
Okay, and what was there something in your earlier experience? Was it primarily the teaching which led you to have that view, or were there other issues which came up, or did you simply notice that as the legislation was going through, it was mostly not focused on men?
I think I noticed it was focused not very often on men, if at all. Particularly, often things in legislation, people refer during the process of writing the legislation, they refer to women and women's issues, but rarely are men referred to specifically while we're debating legislation. And certainly in life in general, in the cases I was looking at, a lot of unemployed NEETs, as they're known, not in education or employment or training. And I certainly in my local government days spent quite a lot of time and energy helping to write policies that would encourage young men to have more training and feel more responsible for a successful outcome for themselves. So it's a sort of a combination of all sorts of things where you've seen young men and boys in less than positive situations.
Because what you're explaining is actually a fairly rare point of view, because certainly from the perspective of men trying to deal with men's issues, Parliament does seem very anti-male. I mean, on the domestic abuse bill, I think on one particular day in the Lords, when it was being debated, women as victims were mentioned 200 times and men as victims 3 times, and mostly men were portrayed as perpetrators, even though we know that 35% of the victims are male. And then there's also a women's health strategy, and there is a Minister for Women and Equalities and a Minister for Women, and 5 different UN, or I think it's 12 different UN special days and committees. What's your perspective on how this has arisen?
I think partly because society and most things historically have been based on the men's world, the men's role in business, and so it's largely seemed to be a man's world. Now I think it's the male position is taken for granted, and women have become much more vocal about their responsibilities. And as women have become more successful in the world of work and they have become more politically active, their voices have been heard far more than in the past. And I don't necessarily think it's a deliberate attempt to rule men out and disregard them and penalise them. I just think it's part of the way things have developed from a historic position when it was a man's world and it no longer is in that accepted sense. So some of the women are perhaps more vocal and more strident than some of us would choose, but their voices are being heard, and I think sometimes to the detriment of the position of men.
Do you feel in your experience that women are an oppressed group by the patriarchy?
No, I do not. I have never felt being a woman in any way a deterrent from any activity, either in employment or in politics. For me personally, it's never been an issue, which I suppose would be frowned on and be criticised by some women, because that would mean that I'm not aware of the concerns in the way I should be. But I'm being very honest, it's never been an issue for me personally, although I can see situations like violence against women and some of those particularly unpleasant aspects of life where I think women have had the need and the right to raise their concerns. I'm not in any way undermining that work, but I'm saying I personally haven't been subject to it.
When you raise the issues of men and boys, do you find that there is hostility from your fellow peers, or do you think that people are simply just not thinking about it?
I've never come across hostility towards it. I just think people are not thinking about it, and perhaps the items and agendas that matter around men, and we've discussed them in the APPG, some of them, are just not on people's agenda.
So you think that if we can put it on the agenda, we should be able to make progress, and this kind of belief that there's a whole conspiracy against men is probably ill-founded?
I think it is, and I think we could draw attention to things, particularly things like men's health, in a way that draws attention to it without it being a conflict and a battle with females, because that's not the intention. And I think we would be listened to if it was presented in a measured and very genuine and sensible kind of way.
It's interesting because once we started the APPG, more than one person said to us, they'll only let you get so far and then they'll stop you. And I'm thinking, I haven't come across...
Who's they in that instance?
Well,
I can't believe of any group that would be so short-sighted, surely.
Well, what was interesting is when we started the APPG, quite a number of people who'd been working on men's issues for years said things like, that's amazing. I never thought I'd see that. I never thought that was possible. And there's a lot of belief in the men's movement that somehow or other there's this massive thing which is stopping men's issues coming forward. Whereas my approach was a bit more, as I found it when I did environmental campaigning in the early 80s, is that parliamentarians were largely ignorant or focused on something else. They weren't hostile to the environment, and I kind of assumed that they probably wouldn't be hostile to men and boys.
As parliamentarians, we should be interested and working towards health benefits for all people. Now, all people are not one category, if you like. So you get aspects that are particularly important in the health of women, and equally, you get important issues for the health of men. I mean, prostate cancer just being one of them. So I cannot think there's any argument against having an appropriate strategy for the people that we serve, men being one group and women being another. And then there are disabled people who have also different requirements. So I don't think it needs to be a battle of the sexes at all. I think it's common sense that just needs to be raised sensibly with people.
When the domestic abuse bill came to the Joint Select Committee back in 2019, and then to the scrutiny committee later in the year, what we noticed is that the only people invited to give oral evidence were representatives of female victims. And just in the last week, there's a Lord's inquiry into the workings of the Children's Act. And already they've taken quite a lot of oral evidence. And as far as we can see, all of it about from the women's perspective. So these are the sorts of bits of evidence that lead us to believe there's some sort of conspiracy, but maybe you have another explanation.
Well, it does, when you explain it in that way, it doesn't sound satisfactory at all. It really would be up to the members, certainly of the select committees, to raise and discuss the witnesses that they're going to interview for their particular work. I am on a select committee at the moment on social care, and we discussed yesterday the sort of processes and who the advisors should be, and we've discussed the witnesses. The members don't actually choose witnesses, the clerks do that are acting for the committee, but it's up to members to raise concerns. And I think it's probably, again, a mindset rather than an objection to men. And certainly I think if I'd been on either of those, my instinct would be to say, fine, but what about the aspects that are affecting men in this instance? Okay. So I think we could do more to make awareness of the imbalance. I don't think it's deliberate. I just think it's conditioning and people don't think sufficiently broadly.
Okay, so actually you think maybe the mindset is even with the clerks rather than with the parliamentarians?
Well, not with the individuals. I think that with the establishment, if you like, this is the way we do it. This is the way we've always done it. Kind of view.
Thank you very much. You've been in the Lords since 2010. Have you noticed a change in the way that men and boys issues can be addressed? Do you think it's got worse, got better, or remained about the same?
Well, I would think it's probably absolutely the same. There are always the opportunities for members to raise subjects through private members' bills, through open questions that we have for debate, for oral questions, for written questions. There is nobody standing up and saying, thou shalt not ask about boys. You could put in anything in those arenas that you want to. Whether they would raise as much interest now as they would have done 10 years ago from members coming and taking part in the debates, I don't know. I think probably more. I think more people would come now to a debate about the educational well-being, say, of working class boys as a topic for debate. I think that would probably raise more interest now than it would have 10 years ago. Because I do think there's a more of an understanding from people about boys not achieving their potential in education. So I don't think it's a question of not having the opportunities. I think they are there if members wish to take them.
So your advice to the men's movement, as it were, is just get engaged more and... Absolutely. Not in a strident, aggressive way, but in looking at the processes that are available and what message would we like to put across, what are we trying to achieve, and then use members to explain to them what you're trying to do and get a voice that way. Doesn't have to be banners outside and drums banging on outside Westminster. There are processes and they're just there to be used properly. Well, thank you very much indeed. It's been very helpful to me. And to our group, Margaret. Thank you.